Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our campfire. Come and sit down, find a place around the fire, enjoy the warmth, the camaraderie, and we'll tell stories and we'll enjoy the company of one another, and then we'll have something to drink and something to snack on. There's popcorn and there's snacks going around. We'll get seated. Well, tonight I want to tell you a story by James Roberts. It's called The Coyote, and it seems to be pretty good. Chapter 1 starts out, rewards offered. So, if you're settled in, let me start this story. The sign on the tree attracted the man's attention while he was still far down the slope. He could see the tall pine on the crest of the ridge, above a veritable landmark in that country of stunted timber, and the square of paper tacked to its trunk under the lowest branches gleamed white against the background of vivid green. Now the air was clear, and every detail of the landscape, the red rocks, the saffron-colored slopes, the green pines and firs and buckbrush and the white cliffs, everything within sight for miles stood out, clean-cut in the brilliant sunshine which flooded the empty land under a cloudless sky. When the man, mounted on a lean, dun-colored horse, first looked up at the turn of that narrow trail and saw the sign, he grunted. Then he frowned, and he looked back along the way he had come with a glowing light of reflection in his gray eyes. See, he was a tall man, slim and muscular, clean-shaven, his face and hands bronzed by the sun and the wind, and his face open, good-natured. A shock of blonde hair showed where his gray, wide-brimmed, high-crowned hat was pushed back from his high forehead. His dress, though typical of the country which he traversed, was distinctive, or it might have been a certain natural grace that made it seem so. See, he wore a light gray soft shirt made of French flannel, and a dark blue silk scarf. He wore leather chaps over olive drab khaki trousers, black, hand-sewed riding boots which displayed their polish, despite a coating of fine dust. Silver spurs, and strapped to his right thigh was a worn leather holster, natural color, from which protruded the black butt of a six-gun. On the back of the saddle was tied a black slicker, the raincoat of the open country, which bulged with a medium-sized pack done up within it. One would have taken him to be about 30, perhaps a year or two more when his face was serious, but when he smiled, that is, when he smiled naturally, he looked little more in years than a youth who had just attained his majority. And when he smiled the other smile, the smile he now expressed as he looked up the slope towards that tall pine with the white square of paper on its trunk, one would have forgotten that smile because of that sinister steel-blue look in his eyes and the direct, piercing quality of his gaze. He walked his horse up the winding trail. His right foot was clear of the stirrup, and he swung it idly. His left hand, in which he held the reins, rested lightly on the horn of his saddle, and his right gripped the cantle at his back. He hummed a ditty of the desert, but his gaze, keen and alert, continually sought the open stretches of trail above him, and at regular intervals flashed back along the way he had come. In time he reached the top of the ridge and pulled up his horse near the tree bearing the poster. He dismounted and walked slowly up a little grade to where he could the better read the legend on the paper. It was printed in large letters, but the recent rain had somewhat faded it, and it stated, $500 reward. This will be paid for the Coyote, dead or alive, by San Jacinto County, Judson Brown, Justice of the Peace, Dry Lake. This man is tall and light in complexion, gray or blue eyes, good teeth, and his horse said branded CC2, keeps himself neat, dangerous with gun, squints when mad, bring him in and get the money. The man swore softly as he read the last sentence. Bring him in and get the money, he said snortingly. You'd think they was talking about a locoed steer that just had to be roped and drug or shot and hauled. Bring him in and get the money. There was a genuine indignation in his tone as he repeated the offensive sentence. Well, he can't be me, he said factitiously aloud. My name's Rathburn. A right good name. His eyes clouded. A right good name till they begin to tamper with it, he muttered with a frown as he lit a cigarette he had built while perusing the placard. He took the stub of a lead pencil from the pocket of his shirt. For some moments he reflected, staring at the sign on the tree trunk. Then he laboriously printed on its lower edge, $5,000 more from the state of Arizona, if you can get it. Rayburn survived his work with a grin, replacing the pencil in his shirt pocket. Then he stepped back and drew his gun. He seemed on the point of sending a half-dozen bullets through the paper when he suddenly shook his head, glanced hurriedly about him, and shoved that weapon back in its sheath. He walked quickly to his horse, swung into the saddle, and started down the trail on the western side of the ridge. Below him he saw a far-flung vista of rounded yeller hills, spotted with the green of small pines and firs. The ground was hard, dry, and gravelly. There was boulders aplenty, and long, sharp-edged outcroppings of hard rocks of a kind of a reddish hue. There was no sign of habitation to be glimpsed from the trail leading down from the high ridge which he just crossed. He continually looked about him with the interested air of a man who is venturing into a new locality with which he is not familiar. Dry Lake? He exclaimed, while his horse pricked up its ears at the familiar voice. Good name for it, if it's anywhere in this country. Hoss, I don't know when we're going to drink again. I didn't figure on hitting a desert up here. He rode on at a brisk jog down and down the winding trail, and then it led across a number of the round, low hills, ever westward. And as the afternoon wore on, more green brightened the landscapes, and patches of grass appeared. Then they came upon a small stream, trickling down from the higher slopes to northward, where horse and rider drank their fill and rested in a quiet, secluded meadow just off the trail. The man's face was a study as he lay back upon the grass in that cool shade of a clump of pines. Whimsical and wistful, it was occasionally lit by a peculiar smile which carried a hint of sadness. His eyes half closed, dreamily. The smoke from his cigarette curled upwards in a thin spiral in the still air of the altitudes. His horse, with reins a-dangling and saddle cinch loosened, cropped the grass which carpeted the meadow. Finally the man arose, tightened the cinch in an absent manner, mounted, and rode back to the trail to continue on his way. At the top of the next ridge he halted, looking at a little ranch which lay in a wide valley a mile or two north of the thread of a trail which he could see winding westward. The place looked poor, poverty-stricken, despite the small field of living green south of the house and the few head of cattle grazing along the banks of a little stream which wound through the valley. For some time the rider sat his horse motionless, frowning in indecision. Then he touched the dun lightly with his spurs, left the trail, and struck off to the north, following the ridge. He kept his gaze focused on the little ranch. The only sign of life which he saw was a heavily burdened clothesline flapping in the idle breeze, which at this point was wafted down from the mountains. When he was almost directly above the small house, he turned his mount down the slope, and gaining the floor of the valley, rode at a gallop for the house. His right hand now rested on his thigh near that holstered pistol. As he brought his horse to a stop near the front of the house, a girl appeared in the doorway. He looked at her in a pleased surprise. Then his hat swept low in a gesture of courtesy. "Ma'am, I've found this to be a country of scattered habitations," he said in a musical bass. "So when I glimpsed your abode from yonder hills, I said to myself, Rathburn, you're most powerful hungry, maybe you better pay a call." His eyes were glowing with an amused light, and a pleasant smile played upon his lips. The girl, who had listened curiously, now laughed in welcome. "Well, there aren't many places between here and Dry Lake," she said, "and I guess it would be a pretty hot ride today. You can water your horse and feed him in the barn if you wish. And I'll get you something to eat, if you're not particular." Her eyes danced merrily. "Ma'am," he exclaimed with mock severity, "I quit being particular when I was as young as that youngster." A boy of 10 or 12 had appeared beside the girl. "Young man, what are those dirt-looking spots on your face?" asked the stranger, frowning with his eyes but smiling with his lips. "They ain't dirt spots," returned the boy with a spirit, advancing a step. "No?" said the man, feigning intense astonishment. "Well, what are they?" "They're freckles," answered the boy stoutly. Oh, that's what they are," said the stranger with a delighted laugh. "Won't they wash off?" "Naw, you can't fool me. You knew what they were." "Well, now, maybe so," observed the man as a girl laughingly turned inside. "Grub'll be ready time you are," she called back to him. "Well, I'll show you where to put your horse," said the boy as the man looked searchingly up and down the valley. Chapter 2. A Boy and a Girl. When Rathburn had put up his horse after giving him a light feed of grain in the barn, he followed the boy to the rear of the house, where he found water, soap, and a towel on a bench, above which hung a small mirror. The boy left him there, and he soon washed and combed his hair. The girl opened the rear door for him, and he walked through the little kitchen into a small front room where a table was set for him. "Sure, ma'am, I didn't figure on causing you so much trouble," he said with a smile. "I didn't expect anything but a snack, and here you've gone and fixed a regular dinner, and this time of day, too. My experience with men in this country has taught me that when they're hungry, replied the girl. "And it wasn't much trouble. Those beans were in the oven and already warm. I just had to make the coffee. I was expecting my brother, you see." "I didn't see any men around the place," he said, beginning to eat. "If I had, I'd made myself known to them before coming to the house. Well, where is he? Is he out with the cattle?" He saw her gaze was troubled. "I don't know just where he is today," she confessed. "He goes away and sometimes doesn't come back for a day or two." She stood in the doorway. Rathburn noted her trim, slim figure and her wealth of chestnut hair. She was pretty and capable. He surmised that her parents were dead, although he could not ascribe the reason for his deduction. Evidently the boy was a younger brother. He wondered if the older brother would return before he finished eating. "Now, how far is it to Dry Lake?" he asked casually. "Oh, why, didn't you come from there?" She seemed surprised. "No, I came from over to eastward." "But it's miles and miles to any place east of here, isn't it?" she asked, puzzled. She must have had a long ride. A ghost of a frown played on his brow. Then he laughed. "Yes, miss, I've been riding some," he confessed. "I didn't know how far it was to anywhere, or I mightn't have not come in this direction." She looked at him wonderingly, and again he thought he saw a troubled look in her eyes. "You're going to Dry Lake?" she asked. "Yeah," he said shortly, and a grim note crept into his voice. "It's west of here, ain't it?" "Oh, about 15 or 18 miles, she answered. "The trail leads you there from the lower end of the valley. The same trail you came in on, I guess. Are you a cowpuncher?" "Don't I look like one, miss?" "Yes, you do, and you don't." She was confused by the quality of his smile, but his eyes seemed to glow at her kindly, with a cheerful, amused light, altogether honest and friendly. She lowered her gaze and flushed despite herself. "My vocation, miss, well, you're too young and pretty to be called ma'am, if you'll excuse me for saying so, is a peculiar one. See, I've punched cows, yes, I prospected and worked a bit in the mines. I've scared the wolf from the welcome mat by standing off the boys at green-top tables, and Well, once I worked on a sort of a farm. He appeared apologetic as he confessed his last. I guess I wasn't cut out for a farmhand, miss. She laughed at that. Are you going to work in Dry Lake? She asked, sobering up. Well, now that's a question, he returned, draining his cup for the last of the coffee. I'll get you some more, she said, quickly taking his cup. Dry Lake isn't a very big place, you know. Well, just how big is Dry Lake? He asked when she returned from the kitchen with more coffee for him. Only 100 or 2, but the men from miles and miles go there because there are places there where you can stand the wolf off at the green-top tables and drink. The troubled look was in her eyes again. Sometimes the wolf catches up with them before they get home, she added, smiling faintly. It's not a safe system, he said thoughtfully. But you might get work in Dry Lake, she said hopefully. You look capable. The cattlemen from back in the hills go there, and they're nearly always looking for men, I've heard. You might meet some of them and get a job. He beamed upon her. I've always heard that a woman gave a man encouragement and ambition, if she was a good one, he mused. You've almost got me thinking I better go straight to work. Why, wasn't that your intention? She asked wonderingly. His face clouded. It ain't always so easy for me to do what I want to do, miss, he said. You see, he broke off his speech with a frown. This is a queer country, miss, he said earnestly. Oh, I know, she said eagerly. I bet you're an officer. And then he laughed. It was the spontaneous laugh of youth, vibrant, compelling, mirth-inspiring. Say, miss, if there's one thing I ain't tackled yet, it's being an officer, he chuckled as he finished his repast. She smiled vaguely, studying him under her long, dark lashes. The boy came into the room, holding his hands behind him, and stood with his sturdy legs braced apart, staring at Rathburn. There he is now, Rathburn explained. Did you try to wash them freckles off? He queried with a wink. I know who you are, said the boy. There was admiration and awe in his wide eyes. Rathburn looked at him closely, his brows wrinkling. Yes, I do, said the boy, nodding. Did he tell you who he is, sis? He asked, looking at the girl. Now, Frankie, we don't care who the man is, she reproved. He was hungry and he's welcome. What's the matter with you? I guess you'd be surprised if you knew as much as I do, the boy boasted. I guess you'd be surprised, all right. I do. I've been surprised more than once at things you knew, the girl said with a laugh. Yes, but I guess you'd be surprised, all right, if you knew who he is, cried the boy, pointing at Rathburn. Come now, young fella. Don't be getting all head up here, said Rathburn slowly, drawing tobacco and papers from his shirt pocket. What do you find to do with yourself around here? But the youngster was not to be diverted from his topic. I was looking at your horse, he said, his eyes shining, and that's how I know for sure and certain who you are. Rathburn gazed at that boy sternly as he touched a match to his brown paper cigarette. My horse is all right, ain't he? Sure he is, said the boy eagerly. I bet you can go some, too. He'd have to go for you to have him, wouldn't he? You're the Coyote. Rathburn continued to smile with an amused tolerance, but the girl gave a start. Her hands flew to her breast, and she stared at the man with wide-open eyes. Frankie, what are you saying? She exclaimed. The boy triumphantly brought his hands from behind his back. He held out a poster. His horse has got a CC2 for a brand, just like it says in this bill that Ed brought from town, he cried. He's the Coyote, all right, but I won't tell, he added quickly, looking at Rathburn. The man avoided the girl's eyes. The boy laid the poster on the table where she could read it again, word for word. Tall, light in complexion, gray or blue eyes, good teeth, horse-branded CC2, dangerous. And this man was tall and blond with gray eyes. $500 reward? Well, I won't tell anybody you've been here, the boy continued. He won't tell, will we, sis? He looked at the girl imploringly. "My brother Ed says what you want you take," said the boy, gazing at the man in admiration. "And he says you don't rob anybody that can't afford it. He says the banks are insured and you've been a friend to more than one that's just a-getting a start in the cattle. I won't tell anybody you've been here, and I won't let Sis tell anybody either." Rathburn was smiling wistfully. "I always tell the truth, Sonny," he said in a low voice. "Don't forget that. I wouldn't want you to lie for me. Any man that would want you to lie for him wouldn't be a man at all, son. See? But old Brown, the judge or the sheriff, might come along and want to know if you've been here," said the boy in breathless excitement. "Then tell him the truth," said Rathburn smilingly. "Tell him a man with a horse branded CC2 was here and kidded you about your freckles, had something to eat, and rode away. Don't lie, Sonny, no matter what happens." The girl took a step towards the table. "You are the Coyote?" she asked in a whisper. "My name is Rathburn, miss," he replied cheerfully. "In some ways I'm a lot like the man described in that reward notice, and I'm riding a dun-colored horse branded CC2. I don't like that moniker Coyote, or I might fess up to it." "Then, if you're him, you're an outlaw," she stammered. Rathburn's dreamy look shifted to the boy who was staring at him. "You'll grow up to be quite a man, son," he said in a fatherly tone. "Those freckles mean a tough skin. A weak sort of skin tans quick, and the toughest just sunburns. You're halfway between. That's all right for freckles, but it don't go in life. It's best to be on one side or the other, and the right side's the best for most folks." He rose and went for his hat. Then he extracted a roll of bills from his hip pocket and laid a $5 note on the table. "That meal was worth it," he said to the girl with a smile. She shook her head. I couldn't take it," she said. "That's clean money, miss. I earned it circumventing 3 of the most ornery card sharks in Arizona." She continued to shake her head. "You do not understand," she murmured. It wouldn't make any difference. We couldn't take money from a stranger who came to us, hungry. It wouldn't make any difference who you were." "Aw, we need it, sis," blurted out the boy. "The Coyote's all right. He wouldn't lie to us." Rathburn laughed and, stepping to the boy, ran his fingers in his hair. "I guess I've made a friend," he said in a wistful voice. Then he picked up the bill on the table and stuffed it into the boy's pocket. His eyes encountered the poster again, and they clouded. He turned away from it. "Miss, you'll let me thank you." "Sure." She nodded, retreating a few paces. "Then I'll be going," he said, stepping to the door. To Dry Lake?" she found the voice to ask. "Yes, to Dry Lake." He left the house and in a few minutes reappeared from the direction of the barn, riding his dun-colored horse. He did not stop, but galloped down the valley, waving a hand in farewell, which the boy answered. Now the day was nearly spent. The sun was low in the west, sliding down like a ball of gold towards the rim of the Blue Mountains. A stiff breeze had sprung up, driving the heat before him. At the lower end of the valley, Rathburn found the trail he had left when he detoured to the ranch. He turned westward upon it, put spurs to his horse, and sped towards town. It was just as well that the girl could not see the look which came to his face as he rode into the sunset. Chapter 3, The Law. Night had descended when Rathburn came in sight of the little town on the edge of the foothills. He rode slowly toward it, staring moodily at the flickering lights between interlaced branches, which waved and weaved in the wind blowing down from the mountains. In all the distance he had traveled from the lonely ranch where he had met the girl and the boy, he had encountered no one. He surmised that the trail to the desert hills to the eastward was not a popular one. As he neared the town, he saw that it consisted of one main street with buildings clustered about it, and numerous shacks scattered in the lee of the hills. There were trees close to the eastern end of the street, which he was approaching, and when he reached these trees, he dismounted He led his horse into the shadows and tied it. And he walked down the main street, which was illuminated only by the stars and the yellow gleams of light from the windows on either side. There were several resorts, and one in particular seemed the most popular. Rathburn glanced in through the doors of this place as he passed and saw that it consisted of a bar, numerous tables where games were in progress. He did not stop, but continued on his way. Few people were on the street. None of them took any especial notice of him. Several doors below the largest resort, which he had so casually investigated, he came to a small, one-story, white-painted building, which, save for the door and the window in its front, just looked like a huge box. Across the glass in the door was lettered in gold, Judson Brown, Justice of the Peace and Notary Public. A dim light shone within, and peering through the window, Rathburn saw that this light came from a lamp in a second room behind the little front office. He looked up and down the street, and he saw but two pedestrians, both walking up the other side of the thoroughfare with their backs to him. He tried the door stealthily, found it unlocked, and stepped quickly inside. 3 strides took him to the door of the inside room. A man looked up from a small table where he was engaging in writing. He was a stout man, large of countenance, with small black eyes under bushy brows which were black, although his hair was gray. He scowled heavily at the intruder, who failed to remove his hat, and who stood with feet well apart in the doorway, a whimsical smile playing on his lips. In a sweeping glance, Rathburn saw that the room contained a bed, a wardrobe closet, several chairs, and other articles of furniture and decoration of a bedroom and living room. His eyes flashed back to the burly man sitting at the table, pen poised, coolly surveying him with a frown. "Your name Judd Brown?" he asked, stepping inside the room and to the side of the door towards the table, where he could not be seen from the street. "I'm Judge Brown," replied the large man testily, "and you should have knocked before you came in, but now that you're here, state your business as quickly as possible." "Well, that's a businesslike tone that I admire to hear, Brown," drawled Rathburn. "You'll excuse my not calling you Judge. I'm afraid when you find out who I am, you'll think that I was kidding you." He smiled amiably while the judge glared angrily. "You're drunk," flared Brown. "The best thing you can do is get out of here. Quick!" Rathburn looked pained. "First you asked me to state my business, and now you tell me to get out," he complained. "You might as well know that I never touch liquor," he added convincingly. Brown was studying him intently with a puzzled look on his face. "Well," he said finally with a show of irritation, "what do you want?" "I want you to tell me the why and the wherefores of this here document," said Rathburn sternly as he drew a folded piece of paper from his pocket, spread it out on the table before the astonished gaze of the justice. "That's one of a number I saw tacked on trees on the east trail out of here," continued Rathburn, frowning. "What's this all about, Brown?" The pen in the hand of the justice suddenly began to waver as the hand trembled. Then Brown dropped it, squared away his chair, and looked grimly at his nocturnal visitor. For some moments his gaze was concentrated on Rathburn's face. Then he slowly read the poster offering a reward of $500 for the Coyote. He wet his lips with his tongue. "So I was right," he exclaimed. "You were headed in this direction. I'm assuming that you're the Coyote." "And you're assuming what's the bare, untarnished truth," said Rathburn. "I'm the Coyote you've offered $500 for, and who'll bring another $500 in several counties in Arizona, not to mention $5,000 that the state of Arizona has tossed into the pot. I suppose I'm worth at least $10,000 as I stand here." "That would be cheap for a man of your reputation," said the justice bravely. "We don't want you across the line in California, Coyote. We won't put up with your depredations, and if you murder one of our citizens, you'll hang." Rathburn's chilling laugh hung upon the justice's words. "You're sidestepping the point," he said, suddenly in crisp tones that were like the crack of a whiplash. "You're anticipating events, Judd. And that's my complaint. That's my business here with you." He brought his right palm down upon the table smartly. "And now that I'm here, Judd, you're sure going to listen." "Don't threaten me," cried the justice. "There are 100 men within a call, and they'd make short work of you and if they got their hands on you. Darn your ornery hide, I'm holding the winning cards in this game," he concluded excitedly. Rathburn was smiling at him, and it was not his natural smile. He gave the justice pause as he looked into those narrowed gray eyes shot with the steel blue light. Rathburn's right hand and wrist moved with incredible swiftness, and Brown found himself staring into the black bore of a 6-gun. Still he saw the eyes above the weapon, and his face blanched. "There are 6 winning cards in my right hand," Rathburn said slowly. "You can start shouting for those 100 men you mentioned just as soon as you want. Brown, it's you and your kind that's made me desperate, dangerous, like you said in that printed notice. I won't fool with you or any other man on earth." What'd you come here for?" stammered the justice. "To get away from back there in that cactus-bordered country of black lava hills where I was born and where I belong," said Rathburn grimly, sliding into a chair on the opposite side of the table from Brown. "Listen to me. I was driven out. I've ridden for a week with the idea of getting where I wasn't known and where I could maybe get a fresh start. And here I find a reward notice staring me in the face from the top of the first hill I cross after leaving Arizona. I've never been here before. I've done nothing to molest you or your town, but you sicked that pack on me first off and hand running without any reason except that you've heard things about me, I reckon." Brown nodded his head as Rathburn finished. A measure of composure returned to him. His eyes gleamed with cunning as he remembered that his front door was unlocked, and someone might by chance come in. But he again felt troubled as he conjectured what might happen in such event. "You cannot blame me," he said to Rathburn. "You've robbed, and you're a killer." "Well, that's what you hear," thundered Rathburn. "I admit several robberies, hold-ups of crooked gambling joints like you've got in this town, and petty larceny bankers who rob poor stockmen with sanction of the law. I've killed one man who had it coming to him. But I've shouldered the blame for every killing and every robbery that's been staged in the desert country for the last 3 years. The Coyote did it's what they say, and the crooks and the gunmen that turned the deal, they go free. I'm talking to you, Brown, as man to man, a thing I've never done with any mouthpiece of the law before. I'm trying to show you how you and your kind can make a man an outlaw and keep him one till somebody shoots him down. I'm sore, Brown, because I know that one of these days I'm going to get it myself." The justice saw that the man was in deadly earnest. He saw the hand resting on the table tighten its grip upon the gun. "I didn't know all these things," he said hastily. "I had to judge by what I heard, and I read. Why didn't you make all that known to the Arizona authorities?" Rathburn laughed harshly. "Because I'd be framed clear across the board," he said cheerily. "It's the law. It's as much of a crime to rob a thieving gambler or a snake of a whiskey runner or peddler as it is to rob a home. I've had to rob to live, and all the while there's been the makings of one of the hardest-looking bad men that this southwest country ever saw in me. And now that I think of it, why the devil I've held off, I don't know." Brown was moved by the sincerity of the man. He saw in Rathburn's eyes that he was speaking the gospel truth. He saw something else in those eyes, the yearning of a homeless, friendless man, stamped with the stigma of outlawry, rebelling against the forces which were against him, relentlessly hunting him down. "You say you came here to start over?" he asked curiously. "How do I know you won't walk right out of this office and turn a trick right here in this very town?" "Well, you don't know it, and that's the devil of it," exclaimed Rathburn. And there's no use in my telling you I won't, for you wouldn't take my word for it. You've got me pegged for a gunfighting bandit of first water and clear crystal, and well, I won't try to wise you up, because it wouldn't do you any good. And now that you know I'm in this country, you'll blame the first wrong thing that happens on to me. I've got no business here talking to you. I'm wasting my breath. You'll have to find out from somebody besides me that I was telling you the truth, and I reckon that coincidence ain't in the pictures. Where's your handcuffs?" The justice stared at him, startled. "Where's your handcuffs?" insisted Rathburn angrily. "In the drawer of my desk out in front," replied Brown. "Go and get 'em and bring 'em here," Rathburn commanded. "I'll keep my drop on you under cover." Brown rose and went to his desk in the front room, while Rathburn watched him in the doorway with his gun held under his coat. The justice returned to the inside room. Rathburn moved a chair close against one of the bedposts. He compelled Brown to sit in the chair, put his hands around behind the supports in the back and about the bedpost. He handcuffed him in that position, and drawing a bandana handkerchief from his pocket, he swiftly gagged the justice. Then he rummaged about the room, and he found a piece of rope tied about with a pack in the bottom of the wardrobe. With this, he secured Brown's ankles to the front legs of the chair. "There," he said, standing back to view his handiwork. "You're pretty well trussed up. Now, I ain't trusting you any more than you'd trust me, and I don't figure on you raising any hue and cry before I can get along on my way." The eyes of the justice were rolling as he struggled in vain to speak. "Never mind," said Rathburn. "I reckon I know what you want to say, under the circumstances, the same being so much on my side. You'd say you believed me and all that, but I took a chance in coming here to tell you what I did, and I never aimed to take more than one chance in a day. So long." Chapter 4. I Knew He Lied. Rathburn extinguished the light in the lamp, walked swiftly to the front door and outside. Closing the door softly, he turned back up the street. He sauntered along slowly, debating his next move. Evidently, the town was the last for many miles in the mountainous country east and north. Westward, he would come upon many towns as the country became more and more densely populated towards the coast. Northwestward, he would be able to keep within the arm of the mountains and still be in touch with civilization. But he would have to make some changes in his attire, and we'll fix that brand on his horse. Instinctively, his course brought him to the big resort he had noticed upon his arrival in town. The entrance doors had been closed against the chill of the night, but he could see the interior of the place through one of the windows despite the coatings of dust upon the glass. As he peered within, he stiffened to alert attention, and a light oath escaped him. Walking swiftly from the rear door was a tall man, the lower part of his face concealed by a black handkerchief. He held a gun in each hand and was covering the score or more of patrons of the place who had risen from the tables or stepped back from the bar, with their hands held high above their heads. "Keep 'em there and you'll be all right," the masked man was saying in a loud voice which carried to Rathburn through cracks in the window glass. "Line up down there now, you hear me? Line up." The patrons lined up, keeping their faces toward the bandit. "If anybody gets to acting uneasy like, it'll be the signal for me to start a shooting. You understand?" Came the hold-up's menacing voice as he moved around behind the bar. "Open both cash drawers," he ordered the servitor in the white apron. He covered the bartender with one gun while he kept the other one pointed in the direction of the men standing in line. Obeying instructions, the bartender took the bills from the cash drawer and laid them before the bandit on the bar. He then made several piles of silver near the bills, walking to and from the drawers of the big cash register. Continuing to do as he was told, he stuffed the banknotes and the silver into the masked man's pockets, one gun's muzzle against his breast, and the other holding the men in line at bay. Rathburn heard footprints on the walk close to him. He whirled and saw two men about to enter the resort. "I wouldn't go in there," he said sharply in a low voice. What's that?" The two men paused, looking at him questioningly. "I wouldn't go in there," Rathburn repeated. "Come here and take a look." One of the men stepped to his side and peered curiously through the window. "Bill," he whispered excitedly, "look here, it's a hold-up." The other man looked over his shoulder. He swore softly. "I'll bet it's the Coyote," said the first man in an awed voice. "Probably is," said Rathburn sneeringly. "They say he was heading this way." "Good place to stay out of if it's him," declared the second man. Rathburn suddenly pulled his left sleeve. "See that?" he said, pointing to his left forearm. The men stared at the bared forearm in the yellow light which shone through the dust-stained window. They saw a scar about 3 inches below the elbow. "Looks like a bullet made that," one of the men observed. "You're right," said Rathburn, letting down his shirt sleeve. "A bullet from the Coyote's gun left that mark." The men looked at him wonderingly and respectfully. "You boys live here?" asked Rathburn. "Sure," was the reply. "We work in the Pine Knot Hotel and Stables. You from the hills?" "Yep," answered Rathburn. "Cowpuncher and horseshoer and one thing and another." "What's he doing now?" He turned again his attention to the scene within the resort, as did the two men with him. The bandit was backing away from the bar towards the rear of the room, still keeping his guns thrust out before him, menacing the men who stood with uplifted hands. "You can tell your funny judge that I called," he sang out as he reached the rear door. "And now, gents," he continued in an excited voice, "it won't go well with the man that tries to get out the back way too soon." As he ceased speaking, his guns roared. The two large hanging lamps, suspended from the ceiling in the center, went out to the accompaniment of shattered glass and crashing on the floor. The three smaller lamps above the back bar next were cut to splinters by bullets, and the place was now in total darkness. Then there was silence, save for the sound of horses' hooves coming from somewhere behind the building. Rathburn drew back from the window as a match flared within, and his two companions moved towards the front door. He stole around the corner of the building and started on a run for the rear. He stopped when he heard a horse galloping towards the east end of the street behind the building which lined that side. He hurried between two buildings which did not extend as far as the resort, and hastened up the street. He did not once look back. Behind him he heard shouts and men running in the street. He increased his pace until he was running softly for the trees where he had left his horse. From above he caught the dying echoes of hooves flying on the trail up the foothills by which he had come earlier that night. The cries down the street increased, a gun barked, and bullets whined over his head. "The locoed fools," he panted. "Didn't they hear that fellow right away?" But the shooting evidently was of a promiscuous nature, for he heard more shots around by the rear of the place where the robbery had been committed. No more bullets were fired in his direction as he darted into the black shadows of the tree. He quickly untied his horse, mounted, rode in the shelter of the timber to the east trail, and began the ascent, urging his horse to its fastest walking gait up that hard trail. The fleeing bandit's sound of retreat no longer came to his ears, but he kept on, scanning the open stretches of trails above in the starlight, a disparaging smile playing upon his lips. Now back in the little town, excitement was at a high pitch. Extra lamps had been lighted in the resort where a big crowd had gathered. Several men ran to the office of Judson Brown, Justice of the Peace, while others went in search of the constable. When Brown failed to answer the summons at his door, someone discovered it was not locked, and the little group of men trooped in to find the justice gagged and handcuffed to his bed. They lighted the lamp, removed the gag. Then, acting upon his instructions, they took a bunch of keys from his pocket, unlocked the handcuffs. He stood, boiling with rage, while they alternately hurled questions at him and told him of the holdup. Well, he ignored their questions as to how he came to be bound and gagged, and demanded more details of the robbery. "We took him to be the Coyote," said the spokesman of the group. He had been one of the men the bandit had lined up. "He was tall, and blue or gray eyes, and a puncher from up north picked him out through the window," spoke up one of the men who had encountered Rathburn outside the resort. "He'd been shot in the forearm by him once. Showed us the scar. The robber was the Coyote, all right." "Certainly it was him," roared Brown. "He came in here, tied me up after pulling a gun on me and threatening to kill me practically, so he he wouldn't have any trouble pulling his trick. Tried to steer me off by saying he didn't come here to make any trouble. Well, I knew he lied. The constable came in as the justice was finishing his irate speech. "I'm going to lead this chase myself," cried Brown. "I want the coyote, and I'm going to get him. I raised that reward to 1,000 on the spot, and I know the sheriff will back me up. Get out every man in town that can stick on a horse, and we'll catch him if we have to comb the hills and the desert country till doomsday." Already horsemen were gathering in the street outside. Feeling was high, for Dry Lake prided itself on a record of freedom from the molestation of outlaws. The rough element, too, was strong for a manhunt, or anything for that matter, promising excitement. A quarter of an hour later, Brown, who was accepted as the leader when emergencies involving the law arose, distributed his forces. He sent 2 posses of 20 men, each north and northwest. A third posse of 12 men started southward. Towns to the west were notified by telephone, as was the sheriff's office. The sheriff said he would be on his way to Dry Lake in an hour. He was amazed the coyote should be in this territory. He, too, wanted the outlaw, and he praised Brown for his reward offer. Judson Brown himself led the posse of 30 men which took the east trail up the foothills. It was an hour past midnight. The moon had risen and was flooding the tumbled landscape with its cold white light. From different vantage points on the ridge high above, 2 men looked grimly down and saw the moving shadows of the manhunters as they took the trail. Well, folks, it's kind of a fun story. Anybody else got a story? We'll listen. And I'll tell you some more of this story next time I see you, here around the campfire with Clay Steele. Hey folks, Clay Steele here. You know, I spend a lot of time outdoors around this here campfire. If you're like me, you get downright annoyed by all those pesky mosquitoes buzzing around. They're just looking for a free meal. Nothing ruins a good night under the stars faster than slapping and scratching at bites. And that's why I keep the bee-itch stop. I keep it handy. One swipe and that itch is gone. No more burning, no more scratching, just good old relief. Made right here in Nevada with all natural ingredients. It's safe for the whole family. So if you're tired of being a mosquito buffet, do yourself a favor and get you some bee-itch stop today. And this is Clay Steele. Watch out for them bugs.